So I was just minding my own business, surfing the web as you do, and I happened to come across this interesting picture of a Kirby Game Boy. And this wasn't a fake design that was made by a random person. This was a special limited edition variant created by Nintendo as a prize in collaboration with some British company called Jacob's Bakery. They apparently created a contest in Nintendo magazine that promoted Prince Giant Mallows, in which you were given a card that potentially had a winning symbol on it. Depending on what symbol your card had, you could have potentially won a limited edition Kirby wall poster, a special Kirby t-shirt, or the top prize, one limited edition Kirby Game Boy. This specific Game Boy is very interesting to me, as it is one of the rarest variants of the system, with there only being 25 created for this obscure giveaway. Somebody actually posted pictures of the Kirby Game Boy online, as well as the paperwork that showed it was genuine. The system itself is a bright pink and has a picture of Kirby where the Nintendo Game Boy logo would be. Learning about this special Kirby Game Boy got me thinking about other variations of the original Game Boy, since it is one of the most revered products that Nintendo has ever put out. While console versions look different from each other, they all still play the games the same. So when it really comes down to it, these variations are all just purely cosmetic. But I personally love having a system that is unique from the base model. It just makes it feel more special to me. That's why I wanted to make this video where I listed off every variation of the original Game Boy, going from least rare to the most rare, including the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Light systems as well. I would also include the Game Boy Color, but that system kind of has a lot of variants of its own as well, so for this video I'm just going to stick with the original black and green. Also, to help me find these variations, I use the website consolevariations.com, a site that has a very large database regarding gaming console variations, as well as a few other sources. With that whole introduction out of the way, this is going to be a kind of a list type video. I'm going to be listing off every Game Boy console, which includes Pocket and Light, in terms of tiers, those being common, uncommon, rare, epic, and legendary. I'll also do a section for like one honorable mention that I have, but other than that, that's how I'm going to be doing this video, so without further ado, let's just get right into it, shall we? Alright, so we're just going to be starting off with the common section of the list. First up, we have the iconic off-white Game Boy, of course, which appeared in many different countries, and for some reason, certain countries' versions are higher on the list than others. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to list them all right here, just to make listing them off easier. I can't really say much about the original Game Boy that hasn't already been said, so I guess let's just move on to the next one. Alright, next up we have the Deep Black Game Boy that was part of the Game Boy Play It Loud campaign, which is basically just a marketing campaign where Nintendo advertised that the Game Boy was now in different colors. This specific Game Boy was all black, had a pinkish purple Nintendo Game Boy logo, and had dark gray buttons on it as well. I love the look of this specific Game Boy because the color scheme just looks so visually appealing to me. Here's another Game Boy that was part of the Play It Loud campaign, the gorgeous green Game Boy. As the name suggests, this Game Boy was all green, had a gray Nintendo Game Boy logo, and had the same dark gray buttons as the Deep Black model. While I do think this design is more visually appealing compared to the off-white model, I still think I prefer the Deep Black because the entire color scheme of that system was the one I liked the most so far. Once again, another Game Boy that was part of the Play It Loud campaign, the vibrant yellow Game Boy. Like the other Play It Loud models so far, this Game Boy was all yellow and had gray text and buttons. Coincidentally, I actually do have a Game Boy Color that looks fairly similar to this particular model. It's entirely yellow as well and has gray buttons, but obviously it's not the same since it's a Game Boy Color. I still think it's pretty cool. The next one is also part of the Play It Loud campaign, the Radiant Red Game Boy. This one is obviously all red and has the same color gray Nintendo Game Boy logo and buttons that the rest of the Play It Loud Game Boys had. I think this one has to be my second favorite of all the Play It Loud models, right behind the Deep Black. This next one is pretty interesting though, the high-tech transparent Game Boy. Unlike the other Game Boys in the Play It Loud line, this one was the only one that had a see-through casing. I've always thought that being able to see the tech within a video game system was a cool idea. Any controllers or systems that allowed me to see the insides always captivated me when I was younger. It was just always very fascinating to me, I suppose. And now we have our first Game Boy Pocket model. You know, for this list, I'm just going to do a little disclaimer right now, I guess. For this list, I kind of just put the Game Boy Pocket right after the original Game Boy, and then I put the Light systems after the Pocket systems, so it may not be super accurate in terms of rarity, but I just did that for convenience sake. So in every section I'll go over the normal Game Boy models first, then I'll go over the Pocket models, and then I'll go over the Light models. So there's your little disclaimer out of the way. But anyways, here's our first Game Boy Pocket model, the red colored one. If you don't know what the Game Boy Pocket is, then I'll tell you. It was essentially just a redesigned Game Boy that was smaller and had a lighter form factor, looking very similar to its successor, the Game Boy Color. It also took 2 AA batteries compared to the original model's 4 AA batteries. The first Pocket model we have on our list is the red Game Boy Pocket. This model was one of the 9 that was released at launch, and is essentially just a red Game Boy Pocket. Our second Game Boy Pocket on the list, the clear purple model. Another of the 9 Game Boy Pockets released in 1996. This one has 2 characteristics that help differentiate it from the others. First, it has a transparent case that lets you see the inside of the system. And second, it was only released in Japan. It also seems to take inspiration from the high-tech transparent model from the Play It Loud line. However, unlike that Game Boy, this one has a light purple tint to the case, making it not only see-through, but also purple. which is pretty cool. Here's our third Game Boy Pocket that was released in 1996, the black model. Not much really to say about this particular Game Boy, although it does use this pinkish purple text for its A, B, start, and select buttons, while most of the other models use black or white text. Now this is our first Game Boy Pocket that wasn't released at launch, the silver model with a black border. While there is a silver Game Boy Pocket that was one of the 9 released in 1996, this one was released in 1997 and was essentially just the silver model with a black border around its screen. The original silver Game Boy had a silver border around its screen, while the other 8 models released alongside it had black borders. I guess this version was just a way to make the silver Game Boy more consistent with its peers. Another of the 9 initial Game Boy Pockets, we have here the blue model. While this may seem just like a blue recolor of the Game Boy Pocket, which it kinda is, there are 2 key differences that make it stand out. First, similar to the black model, it also uses that pinkish purple text for its buttons, which is kind of odd since it could have just used the basic black or white that would have made it more visible, but it still looks cool to me. Second, this Game Boy was apparently released everywhere except Japan. I'll be honest, I couldn't find a lot of info regarding where this model was released, and I could be wrong about this, but I also couldn't find a Japanese version of this system on consolevariations.com, where it also says it was released everywhere except Japan. So I basically came to the conclusion that this statement is more than likely true. Once again, we have another of the initial 9, the yellow Game Boy Pocket. Again, not much really to say about this model, since it's just a yellow Game Boy Pocket, but I do want to mention that it does look even more similar to my yellow Game Boy color than the vibrant yellow Game Boy from the Play It Loud series was. Once again, we have here another of the initial 9, although one of the more distinguishable ones, the clear Game Boy Pocket. This one seems to be the pocket version of the high-tech transparent model from the Play It Loud series, but other than that, it's just another Game Boy Pocket. Yet again, we have here the silver Game Boy Pocket, but not the model with the black border, the original one released in 1996. The only unique thing this Game Boy has going on is its silver border, which no other Game Boy Pocket has. Other than that, there's not really much else, so let's move on to the next one. The second to last of the initial 9, we have the green Game Boy Pocket. Rinse and repeat, this model is just a Game Boy Pocket with its respective color, that being green. The last of the initial 9, we have the pink Game Boy Pocket. While it is just a pink Game Boy Pocket, this one was also a Japanese exclusive similar to the clear purple, and pink wasn't exactly a common color Nintendo had used for their systems at the time, which I believe makes it stand out more. Alright, now that was the last entry for the common section of the list. Moving on, we're going into the uncommon. There weren't any Game Boy Light models in the common section, but there are going to be some coming up. But anyways, let's move on to the uncommon section of the list. Once again, we have another Game Boy from the Play It Loud campaign, the cool blue model. Like the previous models, this one has its respective color and the usual dark gray buttons and Nintendo logo on it. What makes this one different though is that it was only available in Europe and Australia, seemingly never being released to us here in North America or Japan. Though I could be wrong about that. But consolevariations.com doesn't list a North American or Japanese version of this console, so I believe that this is probably true. Here's another interesting one. The gold Game Boy Pocket. Personally, I believe gold is a nice color on any console, and this system is no exception. This one was a Toys R Us exclusive and also came bundled with Donkey Kong Land for the Game Boy in Australia. This next one has a pretty cool retro aesthetic to it. I mean, all of them do since they're Game Boys, but this one even more so. It's the classic Game Boy Pocket. What makes this one interesting is that it was created to look like the original off-white Game Boy, the very first model, and it does a pretty good job of replicating the look. It's a shame though that this one was only exclusive to Japan. I bet it would have sold well in the US personally. And now we have another very interesting Game Boy, the Famitsu Game Boy. Essentially, this is just the clear model with a few small changes. First of all, the border around the screen is metallic and also baby blue in color, with there also being text on the bottom right of the border that reads Famitsu 1997, and then in parentheses underneath it, Model F. The A and B buttons are also the same color as the buttons of the original off-white Game Boy, and all the text besides the Game Boy Pocket logo has a new stylized font, which I really dig. This is just a really interesting take on the clear model. Next up we have another Japanese exclusive, the Hello Kitty Game Boy. This was a pink model that had a few new additions to it and was Hello Kitty themed. First there's a print of Hello Kitty's face in the bottom left corner, along with a yellow heart next to it with 2 blue diamonds on the right and left of the heart. There's also the Hello Kitty logo on the bottom right of the system that is bent around the speaker. Finally, there's small black text underneath the heart that reads, Copyright 7697 Sanrio Tokyo, Japan. 97 refers to the year that this Game Boy was sold, and Sanrio is the company behind Hello Kitty. Although I don't know what the 76 refers to. I thought perhaps it was the year Hello Kitty was created, but she was actually created in 1974, so I'm still unsure. Let me know if anybody knows anything in the comments below. Anyways, this model was sold in Sanrio shops during the Christmas of 1997 in Japan as part of the Sanrio Upload Party Set, which I can't find any info about either, unfortunately. So I guess we should just move on. Alright, this next one also looks pretty cool. It's the Ice Blue Game Boy Pocket. This was a limited edition model that was released in 1997. It was essentially just a blue Game Boy Pocket that had a much lighter shade of blue and was see-through. It was only available for purchase in the US at Target, but you could also somehow get it through Nintendo Power, which was Nintendo of America's monthly video game news magazine that ran from July of 1998 to December of 2012. It also often came bundled with The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. Yet again, we have another Japanese exclusive, the Emerald Green Game Boy Pocket. Personally, this model looks more tealish to me, but I guess Emerald Green does sound more interesting. Unlike most other Game Boy Pockets, this one has gray start and select buttons, usually being black, and it also has the original A and B buttons that the regular off-white model has. It was only available at Japan and Toys R Us for some reason. Alright, we have our first Game Boy Light, and since it's the first one, I'm going to briefly talk about it. So the Game Boy Light was the second revision for the original Game Boy, and unlike the Pocket model, which only reduced the size and the battery count, this one actually added a backlit screen, something Nintendo wouldn't do again until the Game Boy SP came out in 2005. Kind of odd that they waited 7 years after this system to put a backlight on any of their handhelds, but whatever. The only catch to this massive improvement is that this revised console was only available in Japan. If you lived anywhere else, you just had to suck it up and continue on with your shitty little screen that's only visible in the light. Anyways, there's not a whole lot of variants of this revision. There were only 2 colors available at launch, but I still want to talk about it. Speaking of the 2 colors, let's talk about one of them. The gold Game Boy Light. I think I've said before that I like golden variations of consoles, and I definitely do like the look of this golden Game Boy. There's not much really else to say, so let's move on. Let's briefly talk about the other color available at launch. The silver Game Boy Light. It's in the name. It's a Game Boy Light that's silver. It does look very similar to the silver Pocket model though, which is a nice consistency, I suppose. Alright, now let's move on to the rare section of the list. Finally, we have the last of the Game Boys that was part of the Play It Loud campaign, the traditional white Game Boy. And this model looks very similar to the original off-white Game Boy, but it does have a few subtle differences. These include the A, B, start, and select buttons using different colors, having that dark gray to match the other Play It Loud Game Boys, the text of the Nintendo Game Boy logo being dark gray as well, and the lens around the screen is also dark gray compared to the original's light gray lens. Similarly to the cool blue model, the traditional white was mainly only released in Japan, but Toys R Us stores in the UK also received them as an exclusive item to them. This specific model is the rarest of all the Play It Loud systems. Alright, now we're getting into the interesting Game Boys. Not ones that aren't just color swaps, but are kind of interesting, so let's go over them. First up, we have a pretty interesting one. We have here the red Manchester United Game Boy. This Game Boy was also technically a part of the Play It Loud campaign, since it was just a special version of the Radiant Red model, and also released alongside the Play It Loud campaign only in the UK. The difference here is that this Game Boy was made in collaboration with the Manchester United Football Club, one of the most widely supported football clubs in the world. Despite being just a Radiant Red Game Boy, this variant has a few noticeable differences. It has 2 Manchester United logos on it, one right in the center and one in the bottom left corner, and it also has text under the Nintendo Game Boy logo that says Manchester United Football Club. This Game Boy also came bundled with Soccer for the Game Boy, which is obviously fitting since this is a promotion for a football team. And here we have another interesting version of the Game Boy, the Hyundai Mini Comboy. This model was basically just Korea's version of the Game Boy rebranded as the Hyundai Mini Comboy, since the Hyundai Electronics Industrial Company were the ones to distribute the Game Boy in Korea. For many years before the Game Boy was released in Korea, Korea had created various embargoes on imported Japanese goods. So since Nintendo had no way to distribute the Game Boy in Korea, they decided to partner up with Hyundai and have them distribute it for them. Upon doing so, Hyundai decided to rebrand the product as the Mini Comboy, which they did for every Nintendo console they distributed in Korea up until the Comboy 64. The device itself plays just like any other normal Game Boy. The only difference is that there is a Korean logo right in the middle of the system that I'm pretty sure reads Hyundai Comboy on it. Funny enough, with the second Korean release of the Game Boy, this Korean text was removed and it just looked like an ordinary off-white Game Boy. At the time though, due to a wide variety of other consoles and knockoffs, the Mini Comboy was never really a big hit in Korea. But hey, you can't say it wasn't there at least. Next up on the list is the EB Games Game Boy, which came bundled with Killer Instinct for the Game Boy and was only sold at the EB Games stores in the UK. Similar to the Manchester United Game Boy, this model was essentially just a Radiant Red Game Boy that had the EB logo right on the center of the system. If you're asking what EB Games is, then I'll tell you right now. EB Games, formerly known as both Electronics Boutique and EB World, was basically just a computer and video games retailer, basically similar to what GameStop is today. Speaking of GameStops, they actually purchased EB Games back in October of 2005 through a $1.44 billion takeover deal, effectively becoming the parent company of EB Games. While most EB Games stores have by now rebranded themselves as GameStop stores, which in itself is experiencing many locations closing recently, there are still stores that operate in Australia and New Zealand under the EB Games brand. This next one is another interesting take on the clear model, the Extreme Green Game Boy Pocket. This model was a limited edition variation that not only was see-through, but also had this bright green coloration to it that kind of gave off this sort of radioactive/extreme look. Even the logo on the box art had this crazy looking font for the word extreme on it. I believe this one was also available only in the US and Canada, but that's another thing I could also be wrong about. Alright, so our next system we have here is the Ice Blue Clear Game Boy Pocket. Funny story, I actually got this one confused with a different Pocket model, only because they have the same name. You have the Game Boy Pocket Ice Blue, which is, a blue Game Boy Pocket. But you also have this one, which is the clear version, which was a Japan and Australia exclusive. And this is the one with the actual see-through casing. The other Ice Blue Game Boy Pocket is not see-through, which is why I got these ones confused. Also, the games they're bundled with are different. This one, in Australia at least, this one is bundled with The Little Mermaid. I mean, it's not bundled with any games in Japan, but the other Ice Blue model, the one that's not see-through, as I mentioned previously, it did come bundled with Link's Awakening a lot, most of the time. But yeah, I got this one confused with another one. And I am just now recording this entry after doing all the other ones. So yeah, right on. Another Game Boy Pocket exclusive to Japan, the ANA Airlines model. This one was similar to the Ice Blue Game Boy Pocket with it being both see-through and blue, although it was a slightly darker shade of blue. Aside from those aspects, there's also an ANA Airlines logo underneath the Start and Select button. According to consolevariations.com, you had to win this model through a lottery that ANA Airlines held, and it would be shipped in a special box. Our second Japanese exclusive in a row, the Cebu Lions Game Boy Pocket. I don't know much about Cebu Lions, so here's what I could find about whatever it is. Apparently the Cebu Lions are a Japanese professional baseball team in Japan's Pacific League. And this seems to be a limited edition promotional system that was released in 1997. Essentially it's just the blue model, although it does have a white Cebu Lions logo on the bottom left corner. It also came with this special blue bag that had the Cebu Lions logo on it as well, which was meant to store the system in. Consolevariations.com says it was only sold in specific Cebu Lions stores. Okay, I really like the look of this next one. It's the Swedish Game Boy Pocket. As you would expect, this Swedish model was exclusive to Sweden, with it having the colors of the Swedish flag, the front being blue and the back being yellow. There's also a sticker on the back that has the Swedish flag, as well as a number that says which of the 3,000 produced is being shown, proving its authenticity. Did I not mention there were only 3,000 made? Well, every one of these special Game Boy Pockets also came with a special certificate that also could be used to prove its authenticity. Very cool. And now back to our usual Japanese exclusives. We have here the Toyota Game Boy Pocket. This one is just a clear model that has a Toyota logo to the right of the Game Boy Pocket logo, and apparently they were given away when purchasing a Toyota car in Japan. And guess what? We have another Japanese exclusive. This one is the Imagineer Game Boy Pocket. This model was a Game Boy Pocket that had a very pastel-like shade of green, and on top of that could also glow in the dark, something I don't think any other model can do, which makes it very unique, if you ask me. The only way this Game Boy Pocket was obtainable was as a prize in the Imagineers Multi-Racing Championship contest, in which you had to get the best time on the mountain track and send in proof of your best time. There were apparently only 2,000 made, which is pretty limited, I suppose. Next up, we also have another really cool one, the Pokemon Center Pikachu Game Boy Light. It's a yellow system with pictures of Pikachu on the border, as well as text on the bottom of the system that reads Pokemon Center Tokyo with a Pokeball next to it. Supposedly this Game Boy Light was available for a limited time at the Pokemon Center store in Tokyo. I really like the simple design of this Pikachu Game Boy. It looks like it complements the Pokemon Yellow game very well. Wouldn't it be cool if each version of Gen 1 Pokemon had a Game Boy variant that complemented it? A red one with Charmander for red, a blue one with Squirtle for blue, and heck, why not even make a green one for Pokemon Green and put Bulbasaur, just to complete the set. Anyways, I like this one a lot. That's pretty much all I have to say. So let's move on. We have here another pretty interesting one. It's the Tezuka Osamu Game Boy Light. With this one, the system is see-through, but it also has this picture of Astro Boy in the center, with a sort of anatomical view of his head. There's also text underneath that which says Astro Boy, and more text under the Game Boy Light logo that says Tezuka Osamu World Shop. Osamu Tezuka was apparently a Japanese manga artist and animator, and is considered to be the Japanese equivalent to Walt Disney. He created a lot of well-received manga series, one of the most well-known being Astro Boy. Another cool-looking one, it's the clear yellow Game Boy Light. This model is essentially just a clear see-through system that is colored yellow. I really like the look of this one personally. It looks very unique. I haven't seen anything like this before in terms of Game Boys. Apparently it was only available at Toys R Us's for some reason, so that's pretty cool, I guess. Alright, here we have another cool-looking variant by Osamu Tezuka as well, the Tezuka Osamu World Shop Game Boy. This model also features Osamu Tezuka and his creations, similar to the previous one I just went over, although instead of just Astro Boy, this one has many of his different creations. The system is also like this cool see-through red, which is also very unique because I haven't seen something like this as well. This one also says Tezuka Osamu World Shop underneath the Game Boy Pocket logo, just like the previous Tezuka Osamu model. This last entry for the rare category is really cool looking, the rarest Game Boy Light model and also the last Game Boy Light model on this list. So here we have the clear Famitsu Game Boy Light. This model was also see-through like some of the previous ones, but it also had this distinct looking white border, which is usually black. The buttons are also white as well, and there's also the text on the bottom right corner of the border that says Famitsu 500 Model F02. This one kind of gives off this like futuristic type vibe, you know, even though it's just a Game Boy. Alright, now let's move on to the epic category of our list. Starting off with the Backstreet Boys Cross FM console. We're getting into the section of the list where these models are probably unobtainable, so let's start with this one. This is a very rare Game Boy that was only obtainable in Japan as a raffle prize. This raffle was held by the radio station Cross FM during one of the Backstreet Boys tours of Japan. The model itself is just a radiant red Game Boy with the yellow Backstreet Boys logo in the middle and a black Cross FM logo on the bottom left corner. Nothing much else more to say about it, other than if you're a huge Backstreet Boys fan, you'd probably really like this one. Next up we have kind of a weird one to be put up this high, in terms of rarity. But Conservations.com has it here, so this is I think it's pronounced La Caxa Game Boy. La Caxa is basically just a Spanish banking company, but for some reason there was a promotional Game Boy that promoted them, for some reason. And of course it was only available in Spain. The only difference this model has from an average off-white Game Boy is that the La Caxa logo is on the bottom of the battery cover on the back of the Game Boy. That is literally it. That is literally why it is different from a normal Game Boy. I don't know why it's this high, but it is, for some reason. While it's not completely unique from the average Game Boy, I still thought the little addition on the back was notable enough to give this model its own section. And now, this one's a pretty mainstream one that a lot of people probably know of, the legendary Game Boy that survived a bombing during the Gulf War. While the system itself is just an average off-white Game Boy, the fact that it survived a literal bombing and still worked afterwards is pretty damn impressive. You can actually go check it out for yourself at the Nintendo New York store in Manhattan, where they have it on display on the second floor in their museum-like area. I actually went to New York myself this past January, and I was able to check it out in all of its glory, and I just gotta say, it's very cool seeing it in person. And the whole museum was very impressive, honestly. Next up, we have another cool looking model, the Silver Game Boy. Not much is really known about this one, aside from the fact that it was unlicensed and available in Japan. It was most likely some sort of prize or an exclusive variant that was only available in certain stores, but I could also be wrong about that, so take what I say with a grain of salt. As the name suggests, this model is just a Game Boy, except it has a shiny silver shell, though it's unknown whether or not this Game Boy was actually made out of silver. It would be cool, though. Now, this is another sports-related Game Boy, with this one promoting the NBA 1991 All-Stars game. This model was actually not available to the general public, and was instead given out to the executives of the advertising company promoting the game. Which, when you think about it, the idea of an advertising executive being expected to use a Game Boy is pretty far-fetched and hilarious. The model itself had two logos in the center of the system, a TNT Sports logo and a TBS Sports logo, as well as an NBA logo on the bottom left corner. It was bundled with NBA All-Star Challenge for the Game Boy, and Conservation says there were only between 1 and 50 of these variants created, so pretty rare. Alright, this next Game Boy, the Planet Hollywood model, is another Game Boy there's not much information about. The Game Boy itself has a Planet Hollywood logo in the center with small black text underneath it that says London for some reason. This seems to infer that this model was probably a UK exclusive for some reason, even though Planet Hollywood is an American brand, which I don't really have any idea what Planet Hollywood was when I found this Game Boy, so here's what information I could find about them. Planet Hollywood was basically just a Hollywood-themed restaurant chain that was launched on October 22nd, 1991. At first, the Planet Hollywood brand was pretty successful. They had many locations, popular celebrities endorsing them, and even began expanding their business to the hotel industry. But over time, it seems that interest in the franchise dwindled heavily, leading to the company going bankrupt twice and the closure of several of their locations. There are currently only 6 restaurants and 5 hotels operating under the Planet Hollywood name. Once again, we have another unlicensed release. We have the V-Drink Game Boy. This model was essentially just a transparent Game Boy with the V-Drink logo right on the center of the system. Similar to Planet Hollywood, I had no idea what V-Drink was, so here's what I could find about it. V-Drink was basically an energy drink produced by the New Zealand-based beverage company Fruitcore and first launched in New Zealand in the year 1997. It is very popular in both New Zealand and Australia, being considered a rival to Red Bull over in those countries. Supposedly the Game Boy was obtainable through some sort of contest, but the source for a lot of the information around this model is still under investigation. Another very interesting model, we have here what I'm going to refer to as the Serebrov Anniversary Game Boy, but Conservations.com names it as the Soyuz TM-17. This was a special Game Boy released in Russia in the year 2003 by the Memorial Museum of Cosmonautics, celebrating the 10th anniversary of Alexander A. Serebrov, which I assume is how you pronounce his name, traveling to the Mir space station, while also bringing a Game Boy with him during his 196-day stay. The model itself has an emblem that represents the Soyuz mission in the middle of the system. Apparently the actual Game Boy that Serebrov brought with him to space was sold on May 5th, 2011 in an auction for €955, though it's kind of strange because Conservations.com has no entry for Serebrov's Game Boy, which you'd think they would have. But I get it, you know, it's one of a kind, person who owns it probably isn't flaunting it online, so it's probably lost the sands of time for now, unfortunately. Next up we have the system that gave me the idea to make this video, the Kirby Game Boy. I already went over it in the introduction for this video, so I'll just go over the key points briefly. The casing is pink with a picture of Kirby in the center of the system. It was only obtainable in the UK through a contest, and there are only 25 in existence. We have here another character-specific model, the Wario Game Boy. This model looks similar to the deep black Game Boy from the Play It Loud series, but if you look closely you'll notice a few key differences. First of all, the buttons are not all dark gray like the deep black model and instead retain the original colors of the off-white model. The same goes for the screen lens, which is dark gray on the Play It Loud Game Boys, with a normal light gray for this model. Second, there is no Nintendo Game Boy logo and no labels for each button, with usually every model having labels for each respective button. Finally, there's a picture of Wario's face on the center of the system as he appears in Wario Land for the Game Boy, with the lines being white since the background is black. This model also has many similarities to the Kirby Game Boy. For instance, it's a UK exclusive, it was a contest prize, there are only 25 in existence, and it is a character-themed Game Boy, although it's not Wario's signature yellow and instead black. The contest was held on a UK television show called Ghost Train, which I couldn't really find information about, but whatever, that's not really important. I did, however, find information about the Ghost Train show itself regarding its plot, but I won't go over that since I personally find it not very interesting or relevant. Alright, moving on, this next one is another Game Boy that I couldn't find much info about. It's the Fiat Game Boy. The model itself is just a deep black Game Boy with a Fiat logo on the bottom left corner. Supposedly this Game Boy was only obtainable by winning some sort of contest, and there are only 100 made. Consolevariations.com also listed it as a European exclusive. There seems to not be a lot of info regarding these more rarer Game Boys, which includes this next one, the Iveco Truck Game Boy. This model is an off-white Game Boy with the Ford Truck logo placed on the center along with the text above and below that says Iveco Trucks. There's also another logo on the bottom left corner that says Commercial Motors. Supposedly this one was also won from a contest, was only released in the US and Canada, and there were only 100 created. Once again, we have a Game Boy with little information, the Kirin Beverage Game Boy. This model was just an off-white Game Boy with a Kirin Beverage logo on the bottom left corner. I don't really know much about the Kirin Beverage Company, so here's a little bit of what I could find about it. The Kirin Beverage Company is a Japanese soft drink company that is owned by the Kirin Brewing Company, a large beverages company from Japan, obviously. And that's really all I wanted to say about them. So let's move on. Another model there's not much info about, and a brand I know nothing about, the Milka Game Boy. This Game Boy was supposedly exclusive to Germany, and there were supposedly only between 1 and 50 created. The Game Boy itself has the logo of a brand called Milka on the right corner, it being a blue cow standing on a green patch of grass. The Milka brand is a Swiss chocolate brand, but some of their production does come from Germany, which supports the idea that this model was exclusive to Germany. Surprise, surprise, this next Game Boy also has little information about it, the Toyota Game Boy. Supposedly this model was released either in Japan or the US in 1992, and you could somehow receive it for purchasing a Toyota car, though I couldn't find any info about how you would have done so. This one's just your normal off-white Game Boy with the Toyota logo right under the Nintendo Game Boy logo. Now, I kind of like the look of this next Game Boy, the Altus Newing model. This Game Boy is just a traditional white Play It Loud model with the logo of the Altus Newing brand right on the center of the system. From what I can tell, Altus Newing is a brand of golf equipment, and apparently this Game Boy was some sort of prize exclusive to Japan in the 90s, though it is unknown how the one would have obtained said prize. Rinse and repeat, another Game Boy with little information, the BIND model. The Game Boy itself is just an off-white system with a black outline of a personified bee wearing a hat, supposedly a logo of some kind. Unlike with other models that had company or brand logos on them, I couldn't find any information about this logo and what it represents, so if you know anything about it, let me know in the comments below. I could have missed something despite all my research. And it's a pretty cool one. It's a collaboration you wouldn't think existed. It's the Body Glove Game Boy. This model was a black system that had the logo of the Body Glove brand right on the center of the system, along with rough yellow text that says limited edition on the bottom left corner and on top of the system. Similar to the unique Wario Game Boy, this model was different from the average deep black Play It Loud Game Boy. While it still had the same color text and buttons, it somehow has the light gray screen lens of the basic off-white model, which the deep black Game Boy does not have. Unlike previous advertisement systems, I actually am familiar with the Body Glove brand. They're a brand that puts out water sports apparel and accessories such as surfing wetsuits, sunglasses, and other clothing. Similar to the other rarer models, there's not much information regarding this particular Game Boy, unfortunately. Alright, this next model is surprisingly an Italian exclusive, the AC Fiorentina LE Game Boy Pocket. Similar to the Manchester United model, this Game Boy Pocket was created in collaboration with an Italian football club, ACF Fiorentina, a football club based in Florence, Italy. This variant was created because Nintendo became the first sponsor of the team, and produced 300 specially numbered silver models that had Mario in the bottom left corner, as well as the logo of Fiorentina on the center of the system under the Nintendo logo. Next up we have a very special and unique model, the NP100 Game Boy Pocket. The name NP100 stands for Nintendo Power 100th Issue Edition, which is what this system is celebrating. The system itself is a light shade of gold, along with a small Nintendo Power 100 to the right of the Game Boy Pocket logo. There were supposedly two ways to obtain this model, either by purchasing it through the Nintendo Power magazine or by winning through their 100th issue contest, of which I don't really have any information regarding, but that's not really important to the system itself, so let's just move on. This next model looks pretty different from all the others, the Atlas Game Boy Pocket. This model is essentially just a white Game Boy Pocket, What makes it unique is the blue border around the screen. It's rare to see the usual black border getting switched out, and if it is, there's usually a gray one in its place. Well, like the Silver Pocket model, this one is an exception. Aside from that, the text underneath all the buttons is this dark shade of red, and there's also text to the right of the Game Boy Pocket logo that reads PRICLA Pocket, and then a small Atlas logo underneath it. If you're familiar at all with the video game industry, then you probably know Atlas, a Japanese video game developer and publisher, most notably known for the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei series of games. This model was given out as gifts to the Atlas developers in Japan and supposedly Japanese celebrities as well, at least according to conservations.com. Another interesting take on the system, the white marble Game Boy Pocket. Now, I'm pretty sure this model isn't actually made of white marble, mainly because conservations.com states that this was a painted Game Boy done by a toy shop called the Chameleon Club with Nintendo's approval. Though, even if it's not actually made with white marble, it still looks pretty convincing at first glance from the few pictures I've seen. The only info I could find regarding this model was that it was available only at certain stores in Japan, in quotation marks, which really isn't a lot to go off of, but it at least solidifies that this was a Japanese exclusive. Another cool looking one. This next one is another paint job done once again by the Chameleon Club, the wood Game Boy Pocket. Similarly to the white marble model, this one was a Game Boy Pocket that was painted to look like it was made out of some kind of wood. And just like the other model, it's pretty convincing upon first glance. Also similar to the white marble Game Boy Pocket, this one was only available at certain stores in Japan, which also meant this one was a Japanese exclusive as well. Some also refer to this model as the red marble Game Boy Pocket, for some reason. Probably because it looks like red marble. Okay, this next one seems a little too high up on the list to me, but it's the, I think you pronounce it as Gradiente Game Boy Pocket. I had no idea what Gradiente was, so here's what I could find about them. They're basically just a Brazilian electronics company, with Gradiente being the business name they use. Well, their true name is IGB Electronics. Supposedly this model was some sort of giveaway prize that the company was giving to some of their employees. It's just a silver Game Boy Pocket, but with a blue symbol on the bottom left of the system that has text which reads, "A gift from Gradiente." Gradiente? Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. Whatever. It's also a Brazilian exclusive, so obviously. I said this one seems too high on the list because the only thing that really differentiates this model from a normal silver Game Boy Pocket is the symbol on the bottom left, which isn't very substantial to me personally, but it is what it is, I suppose. Another model that feels a little too high on the list, the Thomas & Betts Game Boy Pocket. Another company I'm not familiar with at all. Thomas & Betts basically designed and manufactured electrical components for the electrical and communications markets, respectively. They were founded in 1898 by Robert M. Thomas and Hobart D. Betts, and it seems like they were quite successful, being bought out in 2012 for $3.9 billion by ABB, a large multinational corporation headquartered in Sweden and Switzerland. Similar to the previous model I talked about, this one is just a blue Game Boy Pocket with a Thomas & Betts logo on the bottom left corner, which is why I think this one feels too high on the list. It's a basic model with just one simple thing added to it. It seems to be a common theme among a lot of the different promotional Game Boys, it seems. This one was supposedly given away to Thomas & Betts employees in a company raffle, and there were said to be only 50. Once again, another model that is pretty basic, the Braves TBS Game Boy Pocket. Supposedly this model was part of a giveaway promotion that TBS held, although conservations.com isn't actually sure where this Game Boy Pocket came from. It's essentially just a red model with a TBS logo on the bottom left corner with the Braves baseball team logo above that. There actually was a video posted on YouTube in 2018 of a person that had recently purchased the system and was showing it off. But other than that, I couldn't really find much other information about the system, so moving on. Another basic promotional model that feels too high on the list, the Laughing Cow Game Boy Pocket. This one was just a green model with the mascot of the Laughing Cow brand, a French brand of processed cheese products. Above the mascot, there is French text that I'm not even going to attempt to read, but in English it says The Laughing Cow. It's unknown how one would have obtained this Game Boy Pocket as of now. Aside from the one image I could find of it, there's not much info regarding this next one, the Rakasta Game Boy Pocket. This was another company I didn't really know anything about, so here's what I could find. Rakasta is a children's shoe manufacturer based in Germany, although there's no information as to why they have their own pocket model. The Game Boy Pocket itself is a silver model with the Rakasta logo below the start and select buttons, along with some more small, unreadable, what I assume to be German text. Unlike many of the other rarer models in this section of the list, there's actually a lot of info regarding this next one, and it's a pretty interesting story behind its creation. This one is the Bryant Stokes Game Boy Pocket. Alright, so supposedly this model was one of the last, if not last, of the special edition Game Boy Pockets in Australia, releasing in August of 1998, 2 months before the Game Boy Color hit stores in November. So one important person regarding this Game Boy's creation is Kerry Stokes. Kerry Stokes was a successful Australian businessman. Kerry Stokes and Nintendo of Australia were both major supporters of the Starlight Children's Foundation, and it was through this mutual association and Nintendo of Australia's support of TV game shows that had Kerry Stokes on very friendly terms with the senior managers of Nintendo of Australia. His son, Brian Stokes, was also an avid video gamer, so for his 21st birthday, this model was Kerry's special gift to his son. a 1 of 100 special black Game Boy Pockets that had his son's name on the bottom left corner, along with his birthday and initials. The other 99 systems were gifted to the other attendees to his birthday party. So this model is probably very difficult to get your hands on. But it does have a very interesting story behind it, so I really like this one, the Brian Stokes Game Boy. Anyways, let's move on to the next one. Another model with not too much information regarding it, the Boys Cascade Game Boy Pocket. Supposedly this model was given away to employees of 3 companies, Boys Cascade, Anderson Consulting, and PeopleSoft around 1996 to 1997. As recognition gifts during the implementation of a new financing system or something. This Game Boy Pocket was a black model with the Boys Cascade logo on the bottom left corner, as well as the logo of all 3 companies on the backside of the system. To keep this entry somewhat brief, I'll only go over Boys Cascade since it's only their logo on the front. Boys Cascade is a North American manufacturer of wood products and a wholesale distributor of building materials, headquartered in Boise, Idaho. It's unknown how and why this Game Boy Pocket was created though, so. Alright, let's move on to the legendary section of the list. We're into the category of Game Boys where they are kind of few and far between. You'll probably never get your hands on these ones. I mean, they're in legendary tier for a reason. And starting off this section, we have a pretty interesting one. It's called the Santa Clara Division model. The system itself is an off-white Game Boy that supposedly has a black Santa Clara logo under the Nintendo Game Boy logo, according to consolevariations.com. Though upon researching this logo, I couldn't find any instances where this specific imagery was referred to as the logo of Santa Clara. The imagery in question is that of a black outline of a mountain with trees to the right and a single seagull above, as well as black text that says Santa Clara Division. Unless this model is referring to another location called Santa Clara that is not the one located in California, this system is one that just boggles my mind. According to consolevariations.com, this Game Boy was supposedly attainable by winning some sort of competition during the 80s and or 90s. Next up on the old chopping block, another Game Boy I know nothing about. What a shocker. The Lusticrew model. I think that's how you pronounce it. This Game Boy is another off-white system that has the logo of a brand named Lusticrew right on the center, along with some red French words above it that are difficult to make out or understand. Consolevariations.com says that there are only between 1 and 50 of them made, and that it was exclusive to France. Lusticrew is apparently a French brand that specializes in pasta that has been around since 1911. Alright, another off-white Game Boy with little info, I might call it the JAL model. What makes this Game Boy special from your average off-white model is that this Game Boy has a logo that reads JAL to the right of the Nintendo Game Boy logo, alongside some small black lines behind it. Apparently JAL stands for Japanese Airlines, so obviously it's going to be exclusive to Japan. Alright, this next one's actually pretty cool. It's pretty visually distinct. It's the Pink Hearts Game Boy. This model has a pretty unique design. It has a pink shell, similar to the Kirby Game Boy, though a softer hue. And it also has a red heart right on the center of the system, as well as having removed the Nintendo Game Boy logo and all other text on the device. Supposedly this model was won through a contest, like many of the other rare Game Boys, and I even found a Reddit post from an individual that claims their mother won the exact model on a game show from the 90s. While at first it might seem skeptical to take the word of one anonymous person on Reddit, he backs up his claims by showing the system from multiple angles, the box it came in, the serial number, and even going so far as to detailing what specific show their mother won it on and how they did it, leading me to conclude, and give the benefit of the doubt, that the system in this person's possession is most likely genuine. And in the possibility that I am in fact wrong about this, oh well. It's just some niche obscure shit from the internet anyways. Alright, now here's a model that just really utterly confuses me. The Vivitar PMA Atlanta 93 Game Boy. Another off-white model with little information regarding it, surprise surprise. What differentiates this one is a blue logo on the bottom left corner that reads Vivitar PMA 93 Atlanta. I searched the internet for what Vivitar was, and here's what I found. Vivitar is apparently a company that specializes in photographic and optical equipment, specifically manufacturing, distributing, and marketing. They were founded in 1938 in Santa Monica, California. As for what the rest of the logo means, I have no idea what PMA 93 Atlanta is supposed to be referring to. One could infer that the 93 could be referencing the year 1993, and that the Atlanta could be referring to Atlanta, Georgia, but these ideas are just speculation on my part with no substantial evidence. I still have no clue what the PMA could be referencing though. Feel free to leave a comment down below if you have any information regarding what this logo means. Finally, we have the rarest base Game Boy model, the Ribbon A Sheena Game Boy. And that's Ribbon with 1 B, and Sheena with 2 eyes. This model is a vibrant yellow Play Aloud Game Boy with a pink outline of some anime girl, along with the pink text underneath it that reads A Sheena, and a darker pink text underneath that which says Ribbon with 1 B. Apparently Ribbon is a monthly Japanese shoujo manga magazine that is published by Shueisha, a popular manga magazine publisher in Japan. Shoujo manga is apparently a genre of manga that is targeted towards adolescent girls and young adult women. A Shina is referring to Ayumi Shina, a Japanese shoujo manga artist, with the anime girl on the Game Boy apparently being one of her manga characters. Supposedly, this model was a prize you could win from a contest in the Ribbon manga that was created in collaboration with one of Ayumi Shina's mangas. ConsoleVariations.com says that there is probably a very limited amount of this Game Boy, about 1 to 10, based on other giveaways that Ribbon has done, inferring that they only give away a very limited amount of prizes in their contests. Funny enough, it's kind of surprising that this next rare system also features a manga character. This one's called the Super Beta-Man Game Boy Pocket. I had to look up how to pronounce that one because it's spelled pretty weird, honestly. It's B-D-A-M-A-N. At first I pronounced it Super B-Dayman, but I had to look up the correct pronunciation, and it's actually pronounced Super Beta-Man. Super Beta-Man, like that. Anyways, I have no idea what Super Beta-Man means, so here's what I could find. Apparently Beta-Man is some kind of marble shooting toy franchise from Japan that was originally based on the Bomberman series, though it later expanded into having its own original designs. The toy itself looks like a small humanoid figure with a hole in its chest that is designed to hold a marble, from which the marble can then be launched by pressing the trigger on the back of the toy. Different attachments and accessories can be swapped out on the toy as well and would change various traits of the toy, such as power, accuracy, or firing rate. Anyways, getting back on topic to the model itself, it seems to be a gold Game Boy Pocket with some manga character on the bottom left corner, as well as Japanese text to the right of him, which I have no idea as to what it says since I couldn't find a translation. Oh well. Unlike the previous Game Boy that I just went over, I was actually able to find the character that's featured on this model. The featured character's name is Tamago Tosaka, and he's the main character from the Super Beta-Man manga. He's also featured in an anime series of the same name that ran for 18 episodes in 1991. Supposedly this model was the prize for a contest held in the year 1997 in the Koro Koro Comic, a Japanese monthly shonen manga magazine published by Shogakukan, the company that founded Shueisha. Now this next one is another one that feels really out of place. The Juicin Game Boy Pocket. You see, this one feels really out of place to me because it's just the blue model, except it has the logo of a company called Juicin on the bottom left corner. Apparently Juicin is some chain company that sells building contractors, so I don't know what they're doing with their own Game Boy Pocket. ConsoleVariations.com says that this model was supposedly found by a woman that was cleaning out her father's estate, and also that it was a prize you could win if you accumulated enough points by shopping at Juicin Building Supplies. It doesn't really feel like it belongs in the legendary category because it really isn't all that special. There's nothing really unique about this one besides the way of getting it. And interestingly enough, we have a familiar face for our last Game Boy Pocket, which is also the rarest Game Boy Pocket. This one is the V-Drink Game Boy Pocket. I already went over V-Drink earlier in the video, so I won't do it again. This is the second V-Drink Game Boy, and apparently also the rarest. Since the drink is so popular in Australia, it's only natural that this one would be an Australian exclusive. Not much info is really available on this thing. ConsoleVariations.com only lists that it was a promo from V-Drink, and I couldn't really find anything else about it on the internet. The system itself is green and has the V-Drink logo in the center of it, which I think is an acceptable look for the rarest Game Boy Pocket, but it sucks that there's not more information available about the rarest Game Boy Pocket, but it is what it is. Anyways, I do have one more entry I want to talk about. It's an honorable mention. It's the yellow 25th anniversary Game Boy, and this one has an epic rarity, just to let you know where it would fall on the list. But anyways, I decided to put this model in its own separate category because when it comes down to it, this is just a vibrant yellow Game Boy. But I'll go over what makes it kind of interesting. You see, this Game Boy was an unlicensed release that was distributed by the Game Boy Club exclusively in Brazil during the 25th anniversary of the Game Boy in 2014. The Game Boy Club, from what I can tell, is some kind of Brazilian blog website that is mainly focused on Nintendo-related topics. The Game Boy they distributed was done so through their Facebook page as part of a giveaway, and was also bundled with Pokemon Yellow in its own unique box. According to ConsoleVariations.com, between 1 and 50 of these unlicensed Game Boys were distributed. And anyways, that's the last entry I have. This was a very long video to make. Writing the script alone took me like an entire month. Mainly because I'm a lot busier now. I started working a job during the summer, and I've just been busy with other life stuff, like just hanging out with friends, enjoying life, you know? So I haven't had a whole lot of time to work on this specific video idea, which sucks because it's a very lengthy video topic, the one I chose to make. And then all of a sudden I got super busy, so it took me a long time to finish the script. And I still, as of recording this audio, I still have to edit the video, which is going to take me probably just as long, if not even longer. So, yeah. Anyways, I don't really have much else to say. except for the fact that if you managed to watch this far into my probably super long video, honestly, I'm not sure how long this will turn out, but the audio recording alone is over an hour. So if you managed to watch this far and finish the entire video, thank you so much, honestly. I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, leave it a like, maybe. That helps me out, you know, shows me that you liked it, I guess, obviously. Subscribe. That helps me out too, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I just talked for a long time, so I'm going to try to stop talking now. I'll see you guys later. Bye!